World War I is often overlooked in history because of the much more brutal and barbaric sequel, World War II. But many of the warfighting techniques used in World War II were first introduced in World War I. This is why I chose to study how innovations and evolutions in weaponry affected World War I. For my two secondary sources, I googled information on World War I technologies and weaponry, and I found a website that suited my needs. I used the Library of Congress website to find good primary sources that had the information on World War I weaponry and vehicles. My first secondary source was about the reactions to aircraft being used militarily. It contains many quotes from civilians and soldiers about their opinions on planes being used in warfare. It also contains information about who used planes and what they were used for. Planes were mostly used for reconnaissance rather than combat. Some attempts were made to allow planes to drop bombs and to prevent enemy from reconnoitering or dropping bombs using fighter planes, but fighter planes would not be fully realized until World War II. My other secondary source was about the introduction of chemical warfare and the response from doctors and other chemists. This source is mostly about the chemicals used and when they were used in the war. The gases used in World War I were chlorine gas, phosgene, mustard gas, and lewisite. Gas masks were developed quickly after the introduction of this new weapon to combat its effects, but there was also a psychological effect on the enemy when gas was used. Many people died from this insidious, if innovative, way of fighting battles, despite measures being taken to help prevent casualties. My first primary source is from the New York Times. It contains images of planes in various military contexts and activities with captions. This source describes how information can be relayed via radio signal from the plane back down to a ground team. It also contains an image of a hydroplane being deployed from a warship, which is used for detecting submarines. My second primary source is an image of a wrecked plane. It is a good view of what can happen to a plane in the field and demonstrates the destructive nature these innovations incurred to machines and people. In the image, the biplane's two bottom wings are destroyed while the top ones are intact. The propeller does not appear to be damaged other than possibly being stuck in the ground. My third primary source is a newspaper clipping from the New York Times newspaper. This clipping contains a very good look at a German war Zeppelin. It also contains some information on an attack that had happened recently in France. This Zeppelin is highly detailed and gives us an idea of Germany's innovative concepts for air warfare. Germany was to expand on these ideas with the Blitzkrieg in World War II. My final primary source is a photograph of a tank plowing through a trench to get to the front line. This photo shows the raw power that the tanks in World War I had compared to other vehicles. This image is very clear, and so there are some good details visible. For example, there are items with the tarp covering them with chains holding the tarp down. These are most likely provisions or supplies that soldiers on the front line need, and this demonstrates the initial use of tanks for infantry support. In World War II, the tank's role would evolve into a highly mobile artillery unit. The takeaway here is that innovations in weaponry and equipment introduced in World War I greatly expanded the scale and scope of warfare, resulting in millions of casualties. Many of these informations were in their infancy, and their subsequent evolution in World War II demonstrated their true power. This topic highlights the number of lives lost due to the innovations made in war and how they evolved in future wars. It is also important because the innovations made paved the way for modern weaponry and equipment to be made and used in World War II and beyond. I would like to learn more about the changes made in technology of these weapons and vehicles to help them become even more effective in warfare in World War II. I would also like to learn more about early submarines and U-boats.